On the road, in the gym, at a coffee house. No matter where you listen, this is Prevention Perk. I'm Steve Miller with Mid-America PTTC. It's time to perk up our prevention efforts. My guest today is Rikki Barton, the founder of Onward Consulting. In addition to her consulting work, she is a CADCA trainer in their youth and adult training programs, as well as a trainer for National Council for Mental Wellbeing. During this conversation, we'll explore her talents and passion for prevention and learn about her work around social media's impact on mental health. In her free time, Rikki loves exploring the outdoors on hikes with her rescue dog, Oreo. She recently returned from an epic adventure trip to Nepal where she completed the Everest Base Camp trek, unfortunately without Oreo. Hello, Rikki, and welcome to Prevention Perk.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here. We're going to have a great conversation, but the first question is, how in the world did you get into prevention? What was your path like to this work?
Well, Steve, I was always passionate about young people. When I was a youth, I knew that I wanted to work with youth in some sort of way. And as I started thinking about college majors, I thought I wanted to do counseling and be, a therapist. So I did human development and family studies as my undergrad at Penn State University and graduated, moved 3 days later down to Lafayette, Louisiana. Didn't know a soul down there, just challenged myself to start a life. And worked at a therapeutic boarding school for troubled teenage girls at the time for a couple of years. And that's where I realized that working with youth, I really wanted to be more of my avocation than my vocation, and that pursuing that counseling degree was not something that I wanted to really continue on with. So at the time that I was down there, the city of Lafayette actually received a $1.3 million federal grant called the Strategic Prevention Framework State Incentive Grant. And I was hired on as the project coordinator of that grant. That was my first introduction to the prevention field. And I fell in love with the macro level approach to doing prevention, working with communities to improve them. We were focused mostly on underage drinking, drunk driving prevention. And I just really loved what I got to do, work with youth, involve them in the efforts of prevention while at the same time changing the community for the better. So as grants do, that one came to an end. And so I started really looking across the nation at where I could move next. I was kind of done with my time in Louisiana. I love my people down there, but it is hot all the time. And I am, as you said, I'm a mountains kind of girl, and there are no mountains down in Louisiana. So I was looking for work and ended up coming to Springfield, Missouri, to work as, in the prevention work of 21 counties of Southwest Missouri. And eventually that role within a year became directing all of the work of those 21 counties and continued working in the prevention field. Absolutely loving working with a team of prevention specialists and these communities in those 21 counties to identify their problem areas and help them come up with those solutions. And so that's kind of what brought me to 2.5 years ago, started Onward Consulting so that I can kind of have that impact and train communities across the United States. And my journey just sort of has led me to where I am today. Absolutely love it. Sort of stumbled into the field, if you will. Didn't really know about it back, when I was in college. It was not a field. You couldn't get a degree in prevention science, but it was something that I found and discovered and really loved.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. The funder of this project, along with all the other products of the Mid-America PTTC, is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Although funded by SAMHSA, the content of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. The National Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health serves as a centralized, trusted source for evidence-based education and technical assistance to support the mental health of children and adolescents as they navigate social media. There is a link in our show notes to this resource. But you also, along the way, kind of developed a real interest and a passion for the topic of human trafficking. And I think that in the beginning, there was some understanding about the correlation between human trafficking and that primary type of prevention that we're most noted for or most understand. Kind of talk a little bit about your evolution of passion for human trafficking. How did you get that to kind of merge with substance use prevention as well?
I have always had this intrinsic belief of people's value. I just have, and I think some of that is the faith that I was raised in and understanding who people are and how they were created to be who what they were intended and created to become. And so I think from that sort of base level belief system of the intrinsic value of people, when I learned about the issue of human trafficking, it suddenly became something that I knew I wanted to be a part of ending, because it's just such a complete opposite of valuing a human being, to enslave them, whether that's labor or sex trafficking. And so it kind of was a melding of my passion for prevention along with my belief system of people having more value than being treated that way. And so, yeah, I've been involved in the leadership of the Stand Against Trafficking Coalition here in Springfield for all 11 years that I've lived here. And it is something that I think relates directly to the primary prevention that we do with substance use and all of that, because the tenets are the same. We're still approaching community level change as well as individual level change. In prevention, we talk about those 7 strategies that are, focused on changing individual beliefs, behaviors, and as well as the environmental community norms and changes in attitudes and beliefs within the environment that an individual is in. And so with trafficking prevention, we're doing the same thing. We've got to do individual level, not only assisting people with acquiring freedom from trafficking situations, but also helping to change the environment so that it's not something that exists anymore. The idea of supply and demand is very relevant when it comes to, unfortunately, the product is a human body. And so if we can environmentally change the demand, the supply will never be needed. And so it's kind of that same concept when it comes to drugs. Of course, we know supply and demand within the drug, world. If we can reduce demand, if we can increase awareness about the dangers of use and the consequences of use, then perhaps we would lower demand, which therefore the supply wouldn't be needed. And all of those tenets still stay the same. And so there's just been this direct overlap of trafficking and prevention. And I think that's where that passion comes from.
When I first heard about the idea of human trafficking and it was talked about in this area, I remember thinking, I don't kind of get behind that. Like, this is Springfield, Missouri. If I was in LA, Chicago, New York, Miami, Houston, something like that. And it was eye-opening to me to realize that this is something that happens small town USA all the way across the metropolitan areas. And I know it's been talked about now for a number of years. I've been to a lot of presentations, conferences where people talk about it. But I'm kind of curious, what was your initial understanding about small town human trafficking? But more importantly, is there still having to be an argument about the fact that this isn't a inner city thing or a big metropolitan area thing, like in sleepy little towns or alcoves somewhere in the backwoods? This doesn't happen. Is that still a reality to kind of argue against?
Most people come into thinking trafficking in terms of the movie Taken. If you remember the movie Taken with Liam Neeson from years ago, where, his daughter is kind of snatched off the street in a foreign country, thrown into the back of a van, driven off, kind of idea, never to be seen again until, Liam shows on scene. But, or even in the newest film about it, it's kind of that international human trafficking concept that it happens over there in these third world countries where these poor children are starving and they're taken away from their families and thrown into either labor or sex acts to help support their families, or they're lied to. That still happens. And that's important that we're working on this in a global approach. But it is absolutely happening at the local level. When I moved here and started really getting involved in this work is when I realized that it happens in these small towns. There was a story just about 40 minutes north of Springfield of a young girl who had some different disabilities, and she was essentially trafficked across the entire town. It was the mailman. It was the people in power who were trafficking her, who were actually, buying her. She was being trafficked by the family that she lived with. They weren't her biological parents, but they were in charge of raising her. And that to me is those stories that are happening more and more, where it is happening in small town America, and people are coming, as they become more aware of what to look for and the signs that might be there, people are becoming more aware that it is happening in these small towns. And one of the things that really drives home that it happens in our backyard is online presence. Social media there's a lot of value to it, but there is this really dark side to it where traffickers and abusers use that as a way to groom and to build relationship, especially with young people, to get them to trust them and to be a safe voice and to acquire information about them, and then use that in a very manipulative way to essentially build their trust to the point where they run away from home to go meet their trafficker, or they start sending, hot pics, as they call them these days. They start sending nudes, and then they use that as blackmail against these youth. I'm going to tell your parents, I'm going to send this to your school. I'm going to, show your friends what you've done. And so it just starts this really dangerous sextortion type of environment. And so social media wise, we know that this is happening all the time. And one of the things that I love to do is educate youth about the dangers of being online and how to stay safe and how to talk to an adult if someone is, asking them to send pictures or asking for information. Because you don't know who that person is. You don't know if it is, they might be presenting as a 13-year-old boy, but it's actually a 46-year-old female who's there to groom and to recruit you. And so that online piece is certainly what brings it to that local level, because there are students everywhere. And our good friend Russ Tuttle out of Kansas City, who works in this arena a lot, he said, if it has a chat feature, it has the ability for exploitation of the vulnerable. And so if any app, Pinterest, Snapchat, TikTok, all of these that have chat features, Fortnite, Minecraft, you've got this ability for traffickers to weasel their way in and become best friends with these students and then exploit them.
So in addition to your connection there with human trafficking and social media, you've also kind of developed a passion and understanding for the impact that social media just has on our mental health. And I'm assuming that means an adult's mental health, a teen's mental health, anybody who's engaging in social media uses. And you said earlier, there are some benefits to this. There are some things like, how else is the world going to know you went to the base camp at Mount Everest, right? There's that. But then there's also 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day on social media. So kind of talk a little bit about what your understanding is and how you're kind of building out a presence for that, the social media impact on our mental health.
I always like to start when I talk about social media with, like you just said, there are positives to it. It has connected us. We are more connected as a generation than ever before in human history. And so in some ways, that's a really good thing. And it has exposed us to new ideas, new perspectives. It makes us laugh. Like, my new love language is memes and Instagram reels, like that's my friends and I would just send things back and forth that make us giggle. So there's so many good things to social media, even to the extent that it provides support. And it's a new method to be able to flag mental health issues, such as if their algorithms pick up on certain words, they'll do a check. Do you need to talk to somebody? And you also can report posts and say, please message this person, try to get a hold of them. And so some great opportunities for support as well as creative expression. Even if you're not an artsy person, I am not, but I love to make reels because I just think it's fun and it's just an expression. So there's good things about social media, but there's also this bad things about social media.
Well, I think, and just in that vein itself, we all have experienced not just social media, but this virtual lifestyle since COVID. I spend a large majority of my time interfacing with people in Zoom or other online platforms. Mm-hmm. And it's been an added benefit for reaching audiences that would have been cost prohibitive in the future. But I also think there's a reality to Zoom fatigue, which is, it's not the social media, but at some point, I think it starts to erode your effectiveness because we spend so much time in a non-personal reality. And I think social media is the same thing. If I can connect with people all over the world, but I'm not really connecting with people that are in the next room.
Right. And that is, they've done some research around our time on screens, and they've kind of extrapolated how often we're currently on screens. And the current number that they say is that adults, by the time we kind of reach the end of our life, we will have spent at least 44 years on looking at a screen. And so that is startling to think about. And then some other numbers they've come up with, as adults, we're spending 4 to 6 hours on just our smartphone every day. Now you think about the fact that supposedly 8 of those hours we would be working. So then the other, another 4 to 6 on top of that, that's almost the entire day that we're awake, that we're on a smartphone. And about 2 hours of that are on social media specifically. And of course on your phones, I don't know if everyone gets these, but you kind of get a screen time update every week that tells you you're on, these apps, this many hours, these apps. And it's really fascinating to look at that and maybe make some adjustments if needed, because we are on our phones so much. Youth specifically, they're on screens about 9 hours a day. Now that also can include their computers if they have a computer they're working on at schoolwork and things like that. But whether that's a TV for gaming or a smartphone, they're on their screens about 9 hours a day. About 3 of those are watching videos because, TikToks and YouTubes are kind of the top apps. About 1 hour and 46 minutes is playing games, and an hour and a half on social media. So we know that these youth are on there in a high degree of time. The top apps used by the top number of youth use is YouTube, TikTok, and then Spotify. And Spotify, when I've presented to youth about their social media use, a lot of times they'll kind of say, well, Spotify is one of those apps you just like turn on and then you go and do other things because the music just plays in the background. So that's fair. I definitely understand that. They think maybe something like Snapchat should be higher up there. But as far as number of minutes that are used daily by youth, TikTok's number 1, YouTube's number 2, Roblox is number 3 at this point in time, end of 2023. And so, to see those kind of pop up as the top things, that to me speaks, this is where we actually intervene and interface with youth, is that our prevention messages need to show up on these apps. This is where youth are 9 hours a day. We can make sure that we are interfacing with them there with messages that are important to them, either about their online safety, about substance use prevention, about mental health. These are ways that we can get on there. And, Steve, it's so interesting too. Again, a connection directly with prevention and the substance use prevention world. Social media, as they're doing these brain science research into it, it's addictive just like a drug, in the same way that your brain receptors respond with the happy hormones and chemicals from a drug, from a cocaine hit or from, nicotine, whenever it hits your system. We're seeing those same responders and reactors whenever you get a notification on your phone, and it brings about that happy dopamine release. And so every time you're picking up your phone to look at a notification, every time your wrist vibrates because your watch is telling you that someone texted you, you get this little dopamine hit. And so we're essentially strapped to dopamine, injectors at this point. And so there's this very addictive nature to it, and our brains are learning to crave that, which is why sometimes, especially maybe youth, they may feel actually extreme feelings of depression if they haven't received a notification in a while. They almost pick up their phone with these like phantom notifications. They think that it's gone off. They pick up their phone, there's nothing there. They feel a depressive feeling in that moment because they didn't get the rush that they should have from that dopamine hit. And so that addictive nature that's happening with our, we know drug use, that we've known that for a long time, that drugs create this release of good feelings in the brain. And that's why you crave more and you want more. That's happening with phone use too.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. A podcast is like a breakout session from your daily routine. It's a unique way to perk up your prevention efforts. We'd like to hear from you. Please send your comment, topic, or guest suggestion to midamericapttc@gmail.com. So a couple of thoughts. I knew that we were going to be having this conversation, and 2 things in real time have happened this week. So I was at the coffee shop, and I'm waiting for my Americano, and there's 2 young guys that come in, and one of them is just immediately on his phone. He's not talking to his friend, and he answers the phone, then he's sending a text or whatever he's doing. And then I left or they left, I don't know. And then I was driving away, and they were walking down the street, and his friend still wasn't on his phone, but this other guy was still like actively engaged in it. And I thought, here's an opportunity to be talking to somebody right next to you, but he's in this alternate reality. The other thing, I have not heard anyone say this, but I actually heard it on a Zoom event this week. Someone said, I actually was, I don't know if they used the word addicted, but I was having troubles with social media, and I needed to seek help for it so that I could find a way to balance it into my life, because it had diminishing returns. And they were a young person, I would say under the age of 25. So it was the first person I've ever heard say that. And I thought, I wanted to ask, so is there like a treatment program out there for people that need to go and like detox from social media, or are there therapists that engage with people and talk about this?
Yeah, if there is not, there probably should be, or there will be emerging. Because, and you mentioned my trip to Nepal and the Everest Base Camp trek. I mean, I was really without access to internet. Sometimes where we stayed, there would be some very spotty internet. You had to pay for an internet card. So a lot of times it was just a ton of time. I mean, really for 10 straight days of doing that trek, I was detached from social media and was able to send a few messages back and forth with loved ones, but it was a really enjoyable experience because of that. I wasn't having to think through notifications and responses and all of this. I just could almost enjoy where I was and the people that I was with. I was immersed in a brand new culture, able to have conversations with the two people I traveled with, but also the people we interacted with from all over the world. And it was this I feel like I remember more of it because my face wasn't buried in my phone for all of it. Of course I had my phone with me to take pictures and videos and all of that. But we've lost this connection with one another in some ways because, even when friends gather, their phones are still usually sitting out on the table at the restaurant, or if you're gathered in a living room, they're still sitting around. And I really adore the idea of like phone-free time for families, phone-free time for friends, where it's just, hey, we're all together. And let's just put our phones in a basket and focus on being with one another, because we're missing that face-to-face connection. And you mentioned the pandemic. That, of course, sent everybody into their homes, and we were very isolated. And that created a lot of mental health challenges for individuals. And you couple that with some of the knowledge that we already have about social media and its connection with mental health. And I really think it created a pretty toxic environment for individuals. They did a study of Facebook users among college students and found that access to Facebook had this increase in severe depression by 7% and anxiety disorder by 20%. And that was just with college students. And what they also noticed in that study was that the longer people were on Facebook, the more extreme the feeling was. And so across all apps, I think the argument could be made that the longer we're on social media, the more likely we are to experience anxiety, depression, loneliness, feeling isolated, feeling hopeless. There are some good things on there, but what I challenge youth with when I talk to them is, if something is giving you life and you feel joy about what you're watching or what you're taking in, great. That's a good thing, because that's giving you those good things. But if you're starting to feel jealous, if you're starting to notice that you feel icky, if you start to notice that you're just like are doom scrolling, that is when it's time to put your phone down. But it takes discipline. It takes discipline to say, you know what? Okay, I'm putting this down. I'm going to go outside for a little bit and breathe some fresh air. Some other interesting things when it comes to social media, we also know, of course, there's some physiological effects. It hurts your eyes. It hurts your neck. Most of the time, your neck is craned down and you're kind of slunched over. Your shoulders are slunched. You're just kind of like texting from that position, or you're watching from that position. That's creating a lot of like physical issues with the neck and the upper back, as well as your eye strain. We know sleep deprivation, because certainly turn off your, turn on your blue light filter so that you're not getting that blue light that activates the part of your brain that tells you to be awake. But also just the fact that you're often laying in bed, again, scrolling, taking 30, 40 minutes all of a sudden. And then you're going to bed later. Also, middle of the night, you wake up, you pick up your phone. Oh, look, some notifications came in and you're addressing those. So there's just a lot of sleep deprivation issues that happen. Increased risk of obesity and type 2 diabetes just because of a cell phone, just because of a mini computer, that we're holding in our hands. And what's also interesting is research is starting to see cognitive processes shrinking in the brain, poor concentration, poor memory, poor impulse control, especially in developing brains of youth because of their exposure to these phones, because there's this like 7-second video kind of concept that we're always moving on to the next thing. And so it's teaching our brains not to stay focused for longer than 7 seconds because something else stimulating will come along within those 7 seconds. And so shorter memory, shorter ability to cognitively process what's going on around us. Hence a lot of boredom, hence maybe a lot of experimentation with drugs or other, pleasure-seeking activities.
Well, that was kind of a question that I had. You early on kind of drew a correlation between social media and how that can be a grooming tool for human trafficking.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that correlation between social media and if there, is there a higher likelihood to engage in substance use? When you said, I checked my phone and there was nothing, I'm kind of depressed. It would think, well, I can take a hit over. I'm making a stretch out of it, but I wonder, is there a correlation, between social media and substance uses?
There absolutely is. Columbia University did a study of youth who are just regularly using social media. So just the fact that they have social media, they found that youth were 5 times more likely to buy cigarettes, 3 times more likely to drink alcohol, and 2 times more likely to use marijuana. Just the mere fact that they had a social media account. So again, when I talk with youth about this, we kind of delve into why. Why do you think that's the case? Advertisements that are on there, normalizing the behavior. Also a lot of prevention messages that might talk about some of the consequences of use. They don't necessarily get to see those on social media. They just get to see the party or the person feeling good or talking about their high while they're high. They don't get to see the come down. They don't get to see the consequences of getting in trouble. They don't get to see that there's a physical reaction the next day when you've been drunk the night before. And so, we talk about why that's so appealing on social media, and then maybe why that's a bad message that makes them want to use more because they're seeing either celebrities using or their friends using. But of course, that also then plays a role back into that mental health piece because they might have FOMO, fear of missing out. They might feel like they are not at the party that they wanted to be at. And so that's also tying together this really toxic mixture of substance use, social media, mental health, where we're seeing them desiring these things that aren't a good coping mechanism for them, but they're seeing others do it.
So your passion for substance use prevention, human trafficking, and then also social media's impact on mental health, are these all components of Onward Consulting? Is there more to what you're doing in that realm that you could talk about for the audience?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, those are certainly topic areas, but I also never stray away from my roots of substance use prevention, primary prevention, working with communities to address the issues that they've identified. So I absolutely love the opportunities that I have to travel across the U.S. and work with communities, identifying what are our top substance use issues in communities and how do we address those with a very strategic approach? Of course, using the strategic prevention framework. That's a big passion of mine. And as part of that passion, I love this field and I've been in it long enough that I have noticed that retention of workers in this field is a struggle. It seems to be that people are in it for 30, 40 years or people are in it for 3 years.
Well, we talked about that before we got on here, that whether it's brought out in explanation, the podcast itself, we're exploring this whole idea of prevention being a workforce arena, because everybody has a different path in, everybody has a different experience here, and the audience then gets an opportunity to think, well, I'm here, but I didn't know I could go in that direction. And we've already illustrated the directions that you've gone in, and now you're saying, coming back full circle, this is a great way to for you to tell people that we've got to develop the workforce here. We need to build this into something more recognized for its ability to actually be effective.
Absolutely. And get people excited about the prevention field. I know that, it's hard in a podcast to necessarily see my face, but I really get very excited when it comes to the idea of keeping people in this field. And so I've been working on some different professional development pieces to help people feel better trained, better equipped to go and do prevention work in communities that is effective. Because we know human psyche is, if we feel like we're making a difference and can see that we're making a difference and we like what we're doing, we're more likely to keep doing it. So I've developed some coursework. PreventionSmart.com has coursework that people can take to educate themselves on various aspects of the prevention field, make sure that they're aware of the different things they can be doing, should be doing in their communities, as well as a logic model builder online, which I know that logic models when it comes to the prevention field are a little bit of a split crowd, but it helps you sort of navigate that process of developing one. So just so that people feel better equipped to be able to do the work that they're currently doing or could be doing. And that's a huge passion area of mine too, is that retention, that professional development for the field, whether that's through in-person trainings, online trainings, this, Prevention Smart that I've developed. All of that is meant to help people learn more about the field and therefore go and do it in a way that's effective.
So you live in Missouri, and a lot of the work that you do is within the state of Missouri, but are you finding with your consulting work and the things that you're talking about, is your base growing beyond that? Are you talking to people in ways that are new and kind of invigorating your passions already?
Yeah, I would say I'm probably coast to coast at this point, which is kind of fun. I'm also, if you can't tell already from some of the things we've talked about, I love travel. I love to experience new things and go places. And so, yeah, I'm absolutely all over the place, willing to travel if I were to hold a sign, But really, I love to get to know communities and work within them. Done some work, in the Northeast and over in the West, and just anywhere that I can go that I can help. That's truly the passion area of mine, is to equip people at this point in stage of my life. It's to equip people to go and do this work in their communities well.
Well, you're not only doing it under your own umbrella, so to speak, but you've become a CADCA trainer in the last, 2 or 3 years? Mm-hmm. And now you've recently shared with me that you're going to work with the National Council on Mental Health and Wellbeing. So as a trainer, which I'll let you talk about, the component of mental health first aid that you're most excited about.
Yeah, I do. I love mental health first aid as a training to begin with. And if you've never heard of that, absolutely pop on Google, look it up. It is a wonderful training that teaches the everyday common person how to assist an individual who may be experiencing a mental health challenge or crisis. And it's just this phenomenal day-long training, absolutely worth your time. And so there's a training specifically for adults who work with adults, for adults who work with youth, and then for youth to help their peers. And that's called Teen Mental Health First Aid. And I love that training. I just find, again, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, youth have been the passion area of mine for my whole life. I just see them as such an energy and a future for us, of if we can equip them and empower them to have a voice as adults now. When they become adults, like, they're going to leave the world in a better place, especially this next generation. There's so much to say about the good parts of this young generation today. And so I love the idea of teaching them how to identify that their peer, their friend might be struggling, and then how to connect them with an adult. And so, yeah, I've been training those for 8-9 years now, and working towards that, becoming that kind of trainer across the U.S. where I can go and train individuals in school systems to facilitate that in their classrooms.
That's pretty exciting stuff. So good luck with all of that.
Thank you.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. The internet has dramatically reshaped how we buy and sell everything, including each other. Social media has been used by traffickers to recruit victims, to proliferate their trafficking operations, and to control victims through restricting their social media access, impersonating the victim, or spreading lies and rumors online. A leader in helping us to understand this issue is the Polaris Project. They are a survivor-centered, justice and equity-driven movement to end human trafficking. There's a link in our show notes to learn more about the role of social media in human trafficking. Is there something that you would like the audience to think, say, or do as a result of this conversation that we've had? You get the final thought.
Thank you, Steve. This is always hard for me to summarize, because there's so many different areas that I'm passionate about. And I think the message I want to leave you with is, that you can be an element of change in your community. It doesn't take being an expert. It doesn't take, having degrees and all of this knowledge. It takes showing up and finding a way in your community to get involved in something you're passionate in. So maybe you're not passionate about human trafficking or mental health and how social media has a role, or substance use prevention. Maybe you're passionate about assisting those who have precarious housing situations. Maybe you're passionate about assisting subpopulations who are at higher risk of a lot of things. Whatever your passion area is, show up and be there. Be willing to put in the work to start something or to join something in order to make a difference in our community, because that's how we're going to make a difference. That's how we're going to be better as a society, is if we all start really giving some of our time to this. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but I would just challenge you to show up and look to make a difference somehow.
My guest on this episode has been Rikki Barton. You'll find some links in the show notes so you can connect with her. Thank you, Rikki, for being here.
Thank you, Steve.
And thank you for listening to Prevention Perk, a podcast from Mid-America PTTC. To learn more about our innovations, visit pttcnetwork.org and look under your PTTC for the Mid-America link. Remember, prevention is better together, and together we are stronger.